crucifixion is thorough, and not just the agony on the cross, but even the events that lead up to that torture, which includes the mocking, the stripping, the crown of thorns, the total denuding, you could say, of everything that an ego could hang its hat on. The typical religious emotional response to that is adoration and grief, sympathetic sorrow. But consider that this often keeps believers anchored in sentimentality rather than what what Jesus is asking throughout the gospel. I believe the catalyzing of genuine transformation. So this sadness through empathy and humanity is understandable and totally heartfelt, although a sincere seeker must be lucid about how it can subtly reinforce identification with forms, with history, with dualistic suffering, the pairs of opposites, hot, cold, being healthy, being unhealthy, um, rich, poor, and so on. As mythology, perhaps the crucifixion's deeper aim is not to inspire this grief alone, but to awaken consciousness from its dream state, in which case, wanting one's worldly dreams to all come true. It sounds so innocuous. Hope your dreams come true. May your dreams come true. But wouldn't that just perpetuate the reverie and strengthen the ego of success, the ego of being appreciated, of health, of wealth, especially pleasure? You ever been upset to wake up from a good dream and you try to get back into it, or you try to psych yourself to go back to wherever you were? So if you understand that, then genuine enlightenment requires liberation from false identification, from the dream. And so a nightmare, painful insight, or existential disillusionment, that may paradoxically be more spiritually valuable because it shakes the ego out of its complacency. I'm not saying that it's necessary. I'm just trying to get us to think differently about suffering, despite the powerful allegory of Christ's absolute ego surrender. Many religious groups, even those identifying strongly with Christ, continue to frame spirituality within worldly paradigms. So the idea that God blesses believers with health, wealth, and happiness as a reward for your faith in this illusion, you know what I mean? Or for positive thinking and generosity. And usually that generosity is giving to the megachurch. And the prosperity gospel or the prosperity theology that's emerged. Now, I'm not saying one has to suffer, but in spiritual terms, suffering itself is not your enemy. If you saw on the news the other day, Val Kilmer, the actor from The Doors and Tombstone, two of my favorites, roles he played, recently passed away. He had long battles with health issues, including throat cancer, but he has a poignant expression, which is, I have faith that the shift in my physicality is crucial to the growth in my spirituality. When one sense weakens, another grows strong. End of that quote. So the sheer horror of crucifixion is also symbolic of the ultimate spiritual nightmare, the stark realization that everything the ego holds dear, identity, prestige, power, any shred of social status, and even life itself, is all fundamentally transient and illusory. And in this story, it's shattered all at once. However uncomfortable it is to, engage with religion like this, it's been illuminating for me. Whereas despite this allegory, so many religious people still pursue the prosperity within the illusion, within the illusory world, while feeling good or, believing they're becoming more spiritual. They want their dreams to come true, of course, which itself implies delusion. Dreams are not real, right? If one wants awakening, a nightmare is more likely to wake you up and shake you up, so to speak. Additionally, we see how someone or somehow so many religious minded groups, including Christians, are so quick to justify violence. I think this is really important today. Seeking violence, justifying revenge, framing military aggression as self defense. This is wholly incongruent with the passion of the Christ. If anything, these are examples of collective ego defense, individually or collectively. But most paradoxical to me and morbidly perplexing is how, across the political spectrum, wherever it intersects with religion and religious beliefs, but especially on the religious right, groups frequently justify violence, revenge, war, aggressive military actions as this self defense or protecting the peace, and remain convinced they are coming from moral authority and believe all these forms of extreme cruelty are sanctioned in their good books. Back to the 10 Commandments for a moment. Take the simplest one, the easiest one: don't kill. Its literal translation is thou shalt not kill. It's modernized in all these new versions to don't murder. Why? Only to conform to the weak mind. Because now one can say, well, God didn't say don't kill. That's too broad. Don't murder. Don't intentionally kill somebody out of cruelty. But if it's self-defense, if it's the death penalty, if it's military, it's not murder, right? If you didn't mean it, if you feel bad about it. So many exceptions. There's so many exceptions to the commandment. Why have the commandment at all? I think the worst hypocrisy of these type of so-called Christians is that this rationalization of brutality in the name of, I don't know, defending democracy or Western values or whatever is just so profoundly incongruent with Christ's crucifixion. There are many sages and avatars of world religious history. I love so many of them: Krishna, Buddha, um, Lao Tzu, and others. And they're known for miracles like Jesus performed or experienced: virgin birth, healing the sick, raising the dead, walking on water. But there is what's special about Christianity to me. There's no comparison in mythology or history that I'm privy to of a human symbol of such absolute vulnerability, supreme humility, total surrender to God's will, and non resistance. We hear a lot about peace through strength at the scale of national security, but I don't think we have even begun to fathom, individually or collectively, the radical potential of true strength through peace. Like I said before, if Peter was rebuked for defending Jesus from the unjust arrest, and he didn't even kill anybody, just cut off the ear of the guard, then I'll tell anyone, I'm pretty sure your political agenda ain't the exception. I mean, if this is someone who believes this, you should just be honest about the hypocrisy, and more so, just own it. Own the lack of faith in an all-knowing God who you pretend to believe promised you eternal life, not for your body, but for the soul. I mean, just admit your religion is still the desires of the flesh, or just admit you're not really religious. You don't actually believe it. You don't want to face it. Then there's no hypocrisy. This discrepancy can only be understood not as an expression of self-defense, as in it's not murder because it's the reality of necessary war, but it's ego defense, individual ego defense. The person seeks to protect their identity, their power, their wealth, their reputation, and rationalizes harmful actions through moral or religious justification. Collective ego defense, groups or nations similarly justify aggression or violence as righteous, defensive, necessary, essentially defending collective identity, national identity, ideology, or group interests, thereby perpetuating egoic illusion at the societal scale. So, a couple reflections here. Philosophical reflection. True spirituality is not about making dreams come true, but realizing the dream itself is the obstacle to awakening. And some existential irony. What we resist, pain, loss, surrender, may actually be precisely what catalyzes our awakening. Again, I'm not advocating for misery or endorsing self harm. I'm saying it's already baked in the cake. I'm saying when it comes and cannot be escaped, this is the deeper wisdom of take up and carry your cross. The final truth is not martyrdom with this story of resurrection, but liberation. Swami Shivananda of India, 20th century sage, once said, rejection by all is victory in spiritual terms. Okay, so as we wrap up, what does this mean for the sincere seeker or for a sincere disciple of Christ? Well, the 17th century Japanese Zen master, Bunan Zenji, taught it beautifully. He said, die while you're alive and be absolutely dead. Then do whatever you want. It's all good. I think A Course in Miracles is a manual for truth before, a good life or spiritual life. So rather than striving for success, goodness, virtue, or prosperity, all of which are relative notions, contingent upon societal, cultural, personal, and evolving standards, the sincere seeker's sole objective becomes knowing what is ultimately true. Winning at these games, they're rewarding in the conventional context. They're not right or wrong. I'm not saying do it or don't do it. Saying it doesn't lead one to the deepest realization. Again, the spiritual journey is not necessarily about abandoning activity, but about transforming one's relationship and inner attitude towards the activity through realizing its inherent emptiness. The root of this inner poverty is not external conditions, but the persistent and relentless desire to become. The ego's endless pursuit to affirm, to reinvent, or to redeem itself through achievement, through virtue, through experiences, and to enrich itself or grow itself or strive to become spiritual even, or even become anonymous, which is only its subtle identity and most sneaky because it can't be anonymous. Anonymity is another kind of status of the ego. Anonymous is the name it gives for identity when it believes it's free from it. I'll conclude with another verse from the Gospel of Matthew, in this case, chapter 16, verse 24 and 25, that I think summarizes this whole concept on losing one's life. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. So there you have it. Spirituality is not self-improvement, but self-transcendence. The cross then is a sacred geometry. The vertical beam represents the I, the axis of ego and identity, I, me, pierced by the horizontal blade of surrender. The cross is like the spine or the locus of I-ness, the sense of self at the top, behind the eyes. Therefore, the crossbeam of meditation should penetrate through the third eye and cut through the illusion.